I'm gonna try to do a little bit of a video to show you that I'm not, as incompetent as you've been led to believe when it comes to econ. Hold on a second. Everywhere we go, it's not like I haven't seen something like, and I'm not going to tell you not to do something like buy gold and silver and such as a result of this, but I'm going to tell you why, the data that they're giving you is a little bit misleading. All of this theorizing about the value of the dollar, hold on, let me find, this is the chart. Right here. There's a very compelling argument that I can't really make a good, strong argument against the ownership of something that is a little bit more scarce and is subject to the true laws of scarcity and such than this. Okay, there's nothing but this chart is not what you would call of practical value in the sense that it's a cherry-picked data. And I'll try to explain exactly what I mean by this, because this appears to be a very strong argument, and it appears to knock the winds out of the sails of anybody who would ever potentially argue against it. It's supposed to take the breath out of you so that there's nothing you can particularly say. And what I'm telling you is go out, buy those particular currencies. I mean, I can't argue that I'm not somebody who owns a deflationary currency where, the value, that may be confusing and counterintuitive, because deflationary, of course, means that the value inherently goes up, rather than inflationary where it, inherently goes down, the way that, I'm moving my mouse unconsciously. So this is what's been happening. This is what you would call an inflationary currency, and if it were doing this, it would be a deflationary currency. And I know that sounds backwards, but for the sake of this argument, this is just how it works and how things are, terminology and how people refer to things as. So this is data, and it tells me something. It tells me, but what it tells me is not the lesson that they think it's trying to tell me, which is that we really need to, to prevent governmental action and not do anything about the value of the dollar, and to protect the value of the dollar with every ounce of strength that we have, and vote against candidates who want to do anything that would threaten the value of the dollar. That's not the lesson that this tells me. This tells me go out and buy something that's a little bit more scarce. Go out and make sure that your money is in stocks or something that will beat the rate that is losing value under. Now, admittedly, we've taken a huge drop since the 1970s. That's been a huge decline and stuff, and it's a little bit steeper, but things have been a little bit more stable ever since, the 1980s, and, it's been a much slower decline, and you can see that little trend line break away. This data is not really useful when it comes to politics and when it comes to candidates, however, and I'm going to explain to you exactly why in just a second. I mean, we're going to get to that. This may tell me to go out and buy something like this. It may tell me to go out and buy something that's truly scarce. But what it doesn't tell me is the value is the rate at which this dollar has lost value compared to every other currency in the world. And that's the big problem with, analyzing the economy in isolation from other factors and thought experiments. When you deal with, Milton Friedman and those particular people in their particular camp, and they start talking to you about things, they may have a point about gold and silver. I never said anything otherwise. I would be the ultimate hypocrite if I tried to imply that I didn't believe that may be a particularly smart. You can see that, of course, I'm a stacker from, hearing the sounds of those things rattling around, just so you know when I make this argument. So this is not useful data because it's what you would call cherry-picked economic data. And if you look at it, the Chinese yuan, you need to look at other charts, in comparison to what happened to ours. And you can look at the trend lines and such, and just recently, I guess, over the past couple of years, but there are other economies all over the world, and, tons of them have been losing at the same time. There is market after market after market that we could get to, and if you really want to understand market process theory and you want to understand a thing or two about the market and such when it comes to the elasticity of those particular currencies, you need to understand that a country like China, would view a way that they could potentially increase the amount of products that the U.S. was choosing to import into our country from their country. And this may be a little bit of the reason why we're not as heavy on China as we were in the past, because their currency has gone up. But let me tell you something. If the value of our currency, if the value of another currency relative to ours fell, we would be buying a significant amount and importing a significant amount from them, which is why, for instance, somebody in Britain is going to be, in a relationship with us, for instance, that since they've got a currency that's so much more valuable, they would be importing American products into their countries rather than exporting them, because they would view America and their economy as essentially a much their money goes a lot further when it's used here than when it's used over there. And this has been essentially a truth that's been it's been that way for a long time. And we may have the world's reserve currency and there's all these terminologies and stuff that they use in particular, but we as a nation, of course, this breaks down. You know what I mean? Like, we don't... What usefulness does the value of the dollar today relative to what it was 100 years ago have to me if I were trading in the markets, if I were doing any sort of market transactions? Because you've only essentially compared the purchasing power of the dollar against itself. That's all you've done over the trend line of the past 100 years. That doesn't tell me anything that's really useful about what impact that's going to have when it comes to world economies and how I'm going to be able to interact with countries on the other side of the world and such. And so economics, roughly speaking, doesn't really necessarily conform to the edicts of Austrian economics. And I'm not saying that Austrian economists do not have concerns that are valid and that their concerns are purely spurious, but what Austrian econ has given you and informed you of is merely a protection strategy against the value and the devaluation of that particular currency that you have a little bit too much faith in. And that's the limit of the usefulness of Austrian economics. It's telling you something about the value and the underlying value, and it's told you something about purchasing power heredity. It's taught you the magic of that. That's all you've gotten from the process, however, and that's where the magical bridge of Austrian econ seems and appears to go off a cliff and cease to be really actually useful for much. We're trading against the world, and the fact of the matter is that our currency is too valuable relative to the Chinese yuan, for instance, and some of our key competitors, and they don't appear to understand this because what they hear is that we have a country that's importing a lot from the rest of the world, and they seem to think that that's a good thing, because of the fact that we're able to get all these cheap deals from all over the world. But there's something that they aren't telling you that they're withholding from the discussion, and I'll be right back. That argument goes something like this. I'm back. I had to go to the bathroom. Bio break had to occur. The U.S., it becomes something along the lines of, if you're going out there and you're hedging against the eventual potential reality of inflation, that's all those currencies are good for. So what I'm saying is that if you want a little bit of safety against the elasticity of the dollar, well then a good way to go out and get something like that is to be holding something like these coins. And there's something that's incredibly understandably satisfying about holding, real, what they would call money in your hands. I get that. I understand that sort of just, love of these silver and, all those particular, aspects of it. There's nothing that I'm going to say that's insulting, that. But I don't believe that we've really had a rational discussion for a while. And so what I was going to say is that the argument goes a little bit like this, which is that when it comes to America and the dollar, we have dealt with the rest of the world in a way that isn't helpful. Which is that Americans are either ignorant of the rest of the world, or they think that we're the Holy Land and everybody else is evil and stigmatized. And those communists in the rest of the world are Satan, and communism is evil, and so on and so forth. And the big problem with this is that the United States has evaluated every other economy in the world from the perspective of stigma rather than trying to gain any sort of clarity about what they do or why they do it. And a number of countries in the world have figured out that they can increase their exports to us as well as other people by deliberately manipulating the value and the elasticity of their currency, and they cheat in this particular way. So what that means is that, since economies like we have subsidies here for certain products that we consider to be, basically politically essential. Like a lot of people are going to be subsidizing solar. For instance, there's going to be a lot of solar subsidies and such, and in that direction, and in the energy sector, because we definitely need energy independence. That's key. That's a very key aspect of the world economy right now. In fact, energy is what a lot of it all comes down to. However, we import way too much, and the United States has become a debtor nation, and it used to be a productive nation in which people made things and they sold them, and we've gone from being a producer economy that was a creditor economy where we had, all of that going on, to being a debtor nation that has taken on a lot of debt. So, when you look at this, and you look at the chart that he's made, it's actually arguing against itself when you really know what you're talking about, because the United States, okay, let's look at this, the U.S. national debt, and I want you to look at that number just to understand what I'm trying to tell you, which is that it's 17 trillion, and you've got a lot of people that are reacting to that and freaking out about that and panicked about that, and panic doesn't solve anything. But one thing I want to ask you about this is that if you're so worried about the value of the dollar, would you rather be paying 17 trillion at this point, or would you rather be paying 17 trillion at this point? Because I guarantee you, if you were doing what you were supposed to be doing and doing what you thought was the rational course of action and had been deferring into other assets like gold and silver, and you were holding something else, you would want the value of the dollar to go down. Because that means that this gets paid in something that isn't worth as much as the numbers are misleading you to think it's worth. The purchasing power of the dollar, this is just numbers on the screen. It doesn't tell me what 17 trillion will actually buy me. And that's all it is. The underlying value is not connected to the digits on the screen. I think that you would have learned that more than anybody or any nation on earth by now. This doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't, and when people start freaking out about, of course, the value of the currency and how much money that it's lost, they don't appear to be paying very much attention to the fact that that's a big number. Yowza. But, you know, they don't appear to be factoring that into their panic, which is that, 17 trillion, is a lot. It was a lot of money in 1971, but it's not, nearly as much in 2014 as you've been led to believe it was because of that, inflation that you say is taking place. So, obviously, there are a number of holes in the argument that they've been, launching at you for some time. And another thing is that America has adapted when it comes to dealing with other currencies and the country and stuff. Because of its ignorance, it's adopted a policy which is a one-size-fits-all. And you hear people say freedom is the only way. And you hear them talk about this all the time, and they make these implications and stuff, which is, but what they're really telling you is that unobstructed markets and stuff are the way that they're going to deal with absolutely everything. And when it comes to an economy that's competing with us and is operating against us, that actually has the reality of leaving our strategies out in the open. They're obvious to the rest of the world. And so the rest of the world now realizes that if they manipulate their currency, it's sort of like the United States is going to be chasing after it, and all the people who produce things here and stuff and sell it to the U.S. market are going to be chasing after your goods that are produced in your country like crazy. And the United States has chosen to deal with this by saying, fuck it, that doesn't matter, let them do it. Don't give them any response to it. So what those people do is that they come and they invest in our bond market. They come and pour money into, to prop our governments up and to, keep it afloat. And basically, what I'm suggesting is that we have chosen to pay people who own those bonds off in a currency that is worth more than we really should be paying them off under. So the U.S. has stopped exporting over the past 100 years as well, and it's been importing more and more and more from the rest of the world. Its currency has lost a tremendous amount of its value, at the same time, but that doesn't tell you anything because it's supposed to be this raison d'etre that says that, well, the United States dollar has lost so much, so that means that of course, the argument that he's about to launch is irrational, but no, it's not, because other countries have done exactly the same thing. Their currencies have done, exactly the same thing over the years because of the fact that they're in a competitive cycle with us, whereas while the value of the dollar decreases, they're trying to decrease theirs against ours because of the fact that they're in a race to the bottom situation that's transpiring in order to attempt to compete with us to boost their exports. And the United States has not been winning, in a lot of ways in this particular battle. Yes, our currency has lost a lot of its value, but there are still so many people who are defending the value of the dollar that, of course, we've not been able to push it down far enough to compete with a lot of these other countries that are, shelling us with more and more and more of their products. Now, of course, from certain U.S. people's perspective and certain people in this country, it's an inherently good thing because, yay, I'm able to buy all this cheap foreign stuff, and that's, that's great, yay, but it's not for the whole, if you understand what I'm saying. So the whole U.S. economy, and when you look at it as one cohesive whole, is not necessarily benefited just because one guy is, lush in his foreign exports that he's able to get for, all of this. And there are people here who are making a killing that have come to our country off of, exporting from other countries instead of having domestic production of anything. Does that strike you as a good thing? We're not a creditor economy anymore. We're not a productive economy anymore. We're basically just people who are a services economy that doesn't really much manufacturing to speak of. I mean, there's some of it, but most of our manufacturing is done, internationally by other countries who produce most of the stuff inside this country. This is bad from the perspective of national defense. It's bad from a number of other perspectives and stuff that transpire and stuff, governmentally. So the U.S. economy is now, large. It has a huge dependency on foreign produced, property. Now, energy, we're starting to ramp up domestic production. Clearly, that's done pretty well over the past couple of years. It's one of the sectors, but this isn't good, and the rest of the world is hip to something we don't appear to be aware of, in large part because arguments like this knock the sail out of us. Because the average American doesn't really know a whole lot about the rest of the world, or spend a lot of time, worried about them or their economies or any of that. So there you have it. The dollar has lost a tremendous amount of its value, but does that mean anything? Does that tell me anything that I can use, in order to help our economy or to benefit from or create wealth? No, it doesn't. What it tells me is that I should go out and protect my savings, not by keeping my money, in a deposit into a bank account, because, of course, it's not going to beat the rate of inflation. That's what it tells me. That inflation is now a concern that I have to worry about. It doesn't tell me, however, what the rest of the world has known about inflation and how to deal with inflation for years. I mean, when it comes to inflation and stuff, the United States treats it like it's this brand new phenomenon, and it's something that's really a big, scary word. You wouldn't want the value of the purchasing power of your dollar to lose any of its value, now would you? That's a major concern, and it on the surface it appears like a very strong argument, but of course, if our dollar retains as much value as it does, we're being fucked over, because we have to pay the people who have lent us money in the most valuable currency possible. So there's a huge amount of vested interest that people have in keeping the value of our dollar valuable. Those are foreigners. Those are the people that benefit from that situation. And you've got the Ron Pauls who, think that they understand more than they actually do of the world. So there you have it. How are you going to compete with China if you've got a currency that's worth as much as it is? How are you going to compete with the rest of the world if your currency is worth as much as it is? And the United States views currency manipulation from this whole, let them do it, don't punish them for it, don't do anything about it perspective. Thanks for your time.